The rain clung to the streets of Manhattan like a stubborn memory. Neon signs shimmered on wet asphalt, reflecting hues of crimson and electric blue as Simone Carter stepped out of her cab onto the sidewalk. The hotel in front of her wasn't the sleek modern kind with revolving glass doors and eager bellhops. The Miramar Inn had a different charm. Old, quiet, unassuming. It was the kind of place that had stories soaked into the wallpaper. She slung her duffel bag over her shoulder and walked inside, shivering as the cold air from the lobby brushed against her skin. The place smelled of polished wood, aged books, and something else. Damp. The concierge desk was manned by an older woman with sharp, bird-like features and a uniform that looked a little too crisp for such a dusty hotel. Her name tag read, Margaret. "You have a reservation?" she asked, voice smooth but distant. "Yes, Simone Carter, room 609. Margaret's fingers hovered over the keyboard. The silence stretched just a second too long. "You paid in cash, yes?" Simone nodded. Margaret finally pushed the key across the desk, her nails tapping against the brass. "6th floor, elevators to your left. Enjoy your stay, Miss Carter." The elevator groaned as it carried her up. The numbers overhead flickering uncertainly as if they too had trouble believing in the floors they represented. When she stepped into room 609, a chill ran through her. The room was perfectly ordinary. A neatly made bed, a small writing desk, a window overlooking the city. But something about it felt incomplete. As if the air was too still, the silence too thick. She shook off the feeling, blaming exhaustion. She locked the door, set her phone to silent, and sat at the desk. Her latest investigative piece, a deep dive into the missing person cases in NYC, glowed on her laptop screen. The irony wasn't lost on her. Outside, the rain battered the window, and exhaustion pulled at her bones. She stretched, crawled under the covers, and let sleep take her. She woke up with a start. The air was wrong. The bed beneath her was softer. The window had no view, just a brick wall. And the number on the door? 514. Simone threw off the covers, her pulse hammering as she stumbled toward the door. 514. She pressed her palm against the number as if willing it to change, to morph back into 609. "This isn't right," she whispered. Her mind scrambled for logic. Had she moved in her sleep? Did she sleepwalk? She turned back to the room, her eyes darting around. The layout was nearly identical, but the furniture was slightly off. The desk sat at an angle. The lamp was on the opposite nightstand, and the carpet had a different pattern. But the worst part? Her duffel bag was gone. Heart pounding, she yanked open the closet. Empty. The drawers. Nothing. Her laptop, her notes, her wallet, everything had vanished. She rushed out into the hallway, the old carpet muffling her frantic footsteps as she made her way to the front desk. The lobby looked the same, yet different. Margaret was gone. In her place stood a younger man. his expression bored as he typed on a sleek, modern computer, a detail that didn't match the Miramar's otherwise outdated aesthetic. "Excuse me," Simone said, her voice sharp with urgency. "I need to speak to the manager. I was staying in room 609 and I woke up in the wrong..." The receptionist barely looked at her. "Ma'am, there is no 609 in this hotel." The words hit like a slap. Simone blinked. "What?" "We don't have a room 609, he repeated, finally making eye contact. For a moment, Simone swore there was something in his gaze. Pity? Fear? "That's not possible," she argued. "I checked in last night. Margaret gave me the key." His fingers hesitated over the keyboard. "Margaret?" "Yes, older woman, sharp features, wore a navy blue uniform. She gave me my key." His mouth pressed into a thin line. "We don't have a Margaret working here either." Simone's stomach twisted. She reached into her pocket, hoping she still had the key card for room 609, proof that she wasn't losing her mind. But when she pulled it out, the number on the plastic was faded, barely legible. A deep unease settled in her gut. "I want to see the hotel records," she demanded. "I have proof I checked in." The receptionist's face darkened. "I think you should leave." "What?" "You're causing a disturbance." Simone looked around. The few guests in the lobby avoided her gaze. The air felt thicker, like the walls had drawn closer, listening. Something was very, very wrong. She took a step back, hands raised in surrender. "Fine, I'll leave." The receptionist's shoulders loosened slightly. Simone turned away, but not before catching something in the reflection of the lobby mirror. For a brief, flickering second, she saw the concierge desk as it had been last night. Old-fashioned, the wooden counter worn with time. And behind it, Margaret stood, watching her, her expression unreadable. Simone spun around. The modern desk remained, was gone. The young receptionist stood where he had been. Margaret was gone. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Simone turned and walked out the door, not realizing until she stepped onto the sidewalk that the hotel behind her had changed. The cold night air felt like a slap to Simone's face as she stepped onto the sidewalk. She turned, expecting to see the Miramar Inn as it had been when she arrived. Instead, the sign above the entrance now read, "The Evermore Hotel." The once aged brick facade was cleaner, newer. The windows, which had been slightly warped by time, were now sleek and modern. Simone's stomach twisted. This wasn't the same building. Or worse, it was. But something had altered it. She fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking as she pulled up her search engine. If the hotel's name had changed, there had to be a record of it. She typed, "The Miramar Inn, New York City, history." A few scattered links popped up, reviews, old articles, an outdated travel blog, and then one entry caught her eye. The disappearance at the Miramar, the hotel that swallowed its guests. Simone's breath hitched. She clicked the link. Excerpt from the Manhattan Observer, archived 2014. The Miramar Inn, located on the Lower East Side, has been the subject of urban legends for decades. Though its exterior appears unremarkable, rumors persist about the hotel's unsettling past. Most notably, the case of Amara Hayes, a woman who checked into room 609 in 2014 and was never seen again. Hayes, a journalist investigating local corruption, paid in cash and checked in under an alias. Security footage confirmed she entered the hotel, but no footage of her leaving was ever recovered. Management claimed no record of her stay existed. Staff members who recalled seeing her were later dismissed. The Miramar's ownership denied all allegations of foul play. This was not the first case of a guest vanishing within its walls. Whispered stories suggest that every 10 years, a guest disappears, always from room 609. In 2015, the hotel rebranded as the Evermore, undergoing renovations and replacing nearly all of its original staff. No official statement was given for the change. Simone's vision blurred as she reread the words. Her breath quickened. The hotel had changed names. The staff had been replaced. Just like how Margaret had disappeared. Just like how room 609 no longer existed. Her skin prickled with dread. She scrolled further. There was a blurry, grainy photo of Amara Hayes. Simone froze. The woman in the image, her dark, piercing eyes, the sharp cut of her jawline, looked eerily like her. Simone's mouth went dry. What the hell was happening? Had she been chosen? Had she been lured here? The street felt suddenly empty around her. The city's usual hum, honking taxis, chatter from late-night pedestrians had quieted. She had to find out more. If Amara Hayes was real, maybe someone still remembered her. Simone copied the journalist's name and ran a new search. She expected articles, old reports, maybe a memorial page. Instead, she got one result. A missing persons database, and beneath Amara's name, the words, declared legally deceased in 2020, cause unknown, body never recovered. Simone exhaled shakily, dread curling in her stomach. She wasn't just following a mystery, she was living it. And if history repeated itself, she might not get out. Simone sat on a cold metal bench outside a 24-hour diner, her fingers gripping a lukewarm cup of coffee she didn't remember ordering. The search results glowed on her phone screen. Amara Hayes, declared legally deceased, cause unknown, body never recovered. She swallowed hard. Her mind was a whirlwind of questions, but one thing was certain. Someone had covered up what happened at the Miramar Inn, and she wasn't the first to be swallowed by it. If the hotel had rebranded and wiped its records, that meant there had been witnesses, staff, past guests, people who knew the truth and were forced out. Simone opened a new search tab. She typed, former Miramar Inn employees 2014 to 2015. Most results were useless, but after scrolling for a few minutes, she found something. A defunct LinkedIn page for a woman named Marissa Cordero, listed as a housekeeper at the Miramar Inn from 2012 to 2015. Simone's heart thudded. She copied the name and ran another search. A Facebook profile appeared, inactive for a few years, but still visible. A location tag placed Marissa in Brooklyn. And then, a stroke of luck. A recent comment from another profile. Miss you at a restaurant, Marissa. Hope you're doing well. The restaurant name was visible. Elias's Diner, Bushwick. Simone shot to her feet. She had a lead. The diner sat at the corner of a dimly lit street, its neon sign buzzing faintly in the cold night air. Simone stepped inside, the smell of frying bacon and stale coffee hitting her instantly. A few night owls and truck drivers sat hunched over plates, their conversations blending into the low hum of a radio. She approached the counter, her voice steady. "Excuse me, does Marissa Cordero still work here?" The waitress, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, gave Simone a long, measuring look. "Who's asking?" "I need to talk to her. It's important." The woman hesitated, then sighed. "She don't work here no more, but she comes in sometimes, usually late. You're lucky. She's in the back booth." Simone's pulse quickened. She turned, spotting a woman sitting alone, stirring a half-empty cup of coffee. She looked worn, like someone who had seen too much and never quite recovered. Simone approached. "Marissa Cordero?" The woman's dark eyes flicked up, guarded. "Who wants to know?" "My name is Simone Carter. I need to talk to you about the Miramar Inn." Marissa's face drained of color. She shoved her cup aside and stood up. "I don't talk about that place." "Please," Simone urged. "I think something is happening again. I checked in last night and now room 609 doesn't exist. The hotel's name changed, the staff changed. I found records about a woman named Amara Hayes who disappeared." At the name, Marissa's expression twisted in fear. "You need to stop," she whispered, glancing around as if someone might be listening. "Forget that place. Forget Amara. Just go." Simone leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I can't. I think I was supposed to disappear next." Marissa swallowed, her hand gripping the edge of the table. "You don't understand," she said. "That room, 609, it's not just some urban legend. It's real. And it takes people." Simone's breath hitched. "You saw it happen, didn't you?" Marissa nodded slowly, her eyes clouded with old fear. "I was working the night Amara checked in," she murmured. "I remember her. She was like you, determined, asking too many questions. She paid in cash, just like you, and she stayed in that room." Simone's blood ran cold. "What happened to her?" Marissa exhaled shakily. "One night, she went to sleep in room 609. The next morning, she was gone. No bags, no checkout, just gone. But that wasn't the worst part." She looked Simone dead in the eyes. The room disappeared with her. A chill slithered down Simone's spine. "What do you mean?" "I mean, after that night, room 609 wasn't there anymore. It was just a blank wall. The staff panicked, but management? They acted like it was normal. They fired half the employees, brought in new ones, and told us to never speak of it." Simone's throat tightened. "And Margaret, the concierge?" Marissa paled. "I don't know who that is." Simone's head spun. "She checked me in, but when I woke up, she was gone. Just like 609. Marissa rubbed her arms. "Then you need to listen to me, Simone. That hotel, it erases people. You need to get as far away from it as you can." Simone clenched her jaw. "I can't just run. I need to know why this is happening. How do I stop it?" Marissa hesitated. Then after a long pause, she muttered, "There's only one person who might know. Simone leaned in. Who? Marissa swallowed. The last person who survived it. Simone's pulse raced. Who? Marissa exhaled. His name is Walter Briggs. He was a guest in 2004, stayed in 609, but he got out before it took him. Simone's heart pounded. Where is he now? Marissa hesitated. Then, in a low voice, she said, He's in St. Augustine Psychiatric Hospital. Has been for 20 years. Simone's stomach dropped. She had her next lead. But if Walter had survived room 609, what had it done to him? And more importantly, what would it do to her? The cab ride to St. Augustine Psychiatric Hospital was long and silent, the city lights giving way to dark, empty roads. The further Simone traveled, the heavier the air felt, as if something was pushing her back. She checked her phone. 4:12 a.m. Walter Briggs had survived room 609, but if he had been institutionalized for 20 years, what had he seen? And why had the room spared him? Simone tightened her grip on her notebook. She had to know. The hospital loomed behind tall iron gates, its dull white facade almost glowing beneath the streetlights. It looked more like a prison than a place of healing. Simone shivered as she stepped inside. A night nurse sat behind the front desk, her tired eyes flicking up from her monitor. I need to see Walter Briggs, Simone said. The nurse frowned. Visiting hours aren't until 8. It's urgent, Simone pressed. I'm a journalist investigating the Miramar Inn. The woman's entire expression changed. She looked around, lowering her voice. You shouldn't be here, she whispered. Not asking about that place. Simone's stomach clenched. So you've heard of it? The nurse hesitated. Then, in a hushed voice, she said, Everyone who's ever met Walter has. Simone exhaled. She was getting close. Please, just 5 minutes, she begged. The nurse studied her. Then, with a sigh, she reached for a key card. Fine, but don't tell anyone I let you in. The hallway was cold, lined with flickering fluorescent lights. Walter's room was at the end, the number 312 barely clinging to the door. The nurse unlocked it. 5 minutes. Simone nodded and stepped inside. Walter Briggs sat by the window staring into nothing. He was in his 60s now, his hair white and thin, his hands trembling in his lap, his eyes wide, haunted, like he was still trapped somewhere else. Simone took a slow breath. Mr. Briggs? He didn't move. She stepped closer. My name is Simone Carter. I need to talk to you about room 609. At those words, Walter flinched. His breath hitched. He turned to look at her, and for the first time in 20 years, he spoke. It let me go. Simone's heart pounded. What do you mean? Walter's hands clenched. It takes one every 10 years, but only one. Simone swallowed. You were supposed to be taken? Walter nodded, his whole body trembling. But I wasn't alone, he whispered. Simone's stomach dropped. Walter wasn't alone. Someone else had been there. Who? She asked. Walter let out a shaky breath. My wife. She was in the room with me. Simone's blood ran cold. The room chose her. Walter rasped. She disappeared, and the next morning, the hotel acted like she never existed. The room was gone. Simone's mind raced. Room 609 always took one person. Walter had survived because someone else had been in the room. He hadn't escaped. He had been spared. Simone's breath came fast. How do I stop it? She asked. Walter's haunted eyes locked onto hers. You don't. Her chest tightened. But I don't think it's finished with you. Walter murmured. You left, but it won't let you go. Simone's heart stopped. A sharp buzzing filled the room. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered violently. The air turned thick, suffocating. Simone turned to the nurse, but she was gone. The room felt smaller. Walter's eyes widened. It found you. The lights blinked out, and in the darkness, Simone heard it. A voice, whispering, calling her back. The darkness in Walter's room felt alive. The air thickened, pressing against Simone's chest like unseen hands. Her pulse pounded as she took a shaky step back, but her legs felt heavy. The room was pulling her in. Walter's eyes were wide with terror. Fight it, girl. His voice was urgent. Hoarse. If you let it take you now, you won't make it back. Simone's breath came fast. She could feel it. The same force she had felt in the hotel. The same eerie stillness. Room 609. It was here, calling her. A whisper slithered through the air, threading itself into her ears like a ghost's breath. You were chosen. Come back. Simone clenched her fists, digging her nails into her palms. Pain, sharp, real, a way to anchor herself. Walter was gripping the arms of his chair, his whole body shaking. You have to break the connection, he gasped. It only takes the ones who let it in. Simone shook her head violently. No, she wouldn't let this happen. She wasn't Amara Hayes. She wasn't Walter's wife. She was not going to vanish. She forced herself to focus, her senses, her body, the real world. She took a staggering step toward Walter, reaching for his wrists. How did you survive? She demanded. His breath hitched. I held on to something from before. My wife, she let go. But I kept her ring, held it in my hand, something real, something that proved I existed outside that room. Simone's mind raced. She had to ground herself. She fumbled in her pocket, her fingers closing around the key card she had found earlier, the one from room 609. The numbers were faded, but she knew what they had once been. 609. She clenched it tight, forcing herself to breathe. You don't own me, she whispered. You don't decide my story. A shrieking sound filled the air like a radio stuck between stations. The force around her tightened, then snapped. The room lurched, and suddenly the lights flickered back on. The air cleared. Walter was gasping, his hands shaking violently. Simone staggered, her head spinning. It was gone. For now. Walter stared at her. You fought it. Simone wiped sweat from her forehead, still gripping the key card like a lifeline. Yeah, she panted, but I don't think it's done with me. Walter swallowed. It won't stop until it gets what it wants. Simone's stomach turned. And what if it wasn't just after her? What if it was waiting for someone else to take her place? Simone sat in her tiny studio apartment staring at the keycard. It was the only thing left from room 609. The numbers were almost completely faded now, but she knew the truth. That room existed. It had taken people before her, and it wasn't finished. Walter had said it needed to take someone. Walter had said it needed to take someone. One person every 10 years. Simone inhaled sharply. She wasn't going to let that happen again. She opened her laptop, her fingers moving with purpose. If the Miramar Inn had disappeared once, it could disappear again. But that didn't mean it was gone. She typed, "The Evermore Hotel, Lower East Side, NYC." The search results flickered across the screen. An active website, a booking page, recent reviews. It was still there, still waiting. Simone's jaw clenched. This wasn't just a haunted hotel. It was a trap. And the only way to stop a trap? Spring it yourself. The Evermore Hotel looked exactly the same as the Miramar Inn had when she first checked in. Only now Simone knew the truth. She stepped through the glass doors, feeling a familiar heaviness in the air. The scent of aged wood, dust, and something damp curled in her nostrils. At the front desk, a smiling receptionist greeted her. A young man, not the same one as before. The hotel kept changing its face. "Checking in?" he asked. Simone slid a stack of cash across the counter. "One night," she said. The receptionist hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keys. Then, slowly, he pushed a brass key toward her. "Fifth floor," he said. "Room 514. Simone's stomach twisted. They wouldn't give her 609. Not unless she made them. She smiled politely, picked up her key, and walked toward the elevator. But she had no intention of staying in 514. The fifth floor hallway was exactly as she remembered it. Dimly lit, eerily silent. She walked past 514, past 515. Her fingers grazed the wall where 609 should have been. Nothing. Just smooth plaster. Her heart pounded. Walter had said the room disappeared, but that didn't mean it was gone. It was hidden. Simone reached into her bag, pulling out a small utility knife. She pressed the blade against the wall and sliced. The wallpaper peeled back easily, revealing something beneath it. Her breath caught. A door. Faded, buried under layers of paint and paper, and etched into the surface, barely visible, was a number. 609. Simone's pulse roared in her ears. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the key card, the one from her first night. The plastic was warm against her fingers. She reached for the doorknob and turned it. The air was wrong. The moment she stepped inside, a crushing silence swallowed her. The room looked exactly as she remembered. The bed neatly made, the writing desk, the old lamp casting a weak glow. But there was something different now. The mirror. The large antique mirror above the desk. It hadn't been cracked before. Now, a deep fracture ran through the glass, like a wound splitting the reflection in two. And in the shattered surface, something moved. Simone's breath caught. A woman stood in the mirror staring at her. Not just any woman. Amara Hayes. Her face was pale, hollow-eyed. Her lips barely moved as she whispered, "It's not room, it's a door." Simone's body locked up. A shadow shifted behind her. Cold air coiled around her like fingers. The floor creaked. A voice hissed in her ear, "It's your turn." Simone spun around. The door was gone. The walls were closing in. The room was taking her. No, she refused to let this happen. Her hand flew to her pocket, gripping the key card. Something from before. Walter had said he survived because he held onto something real. Simone clenched the key in her fist, her voice shaking but strong. "You don't get to decide," she whispered. "Not this time." She lifted the key and jammed it into the crack in the mirror. A sharp, shattering sound split the air. The room lurched. The walls rippled like fabric tearing at the seams. A horrific screeching filled the space. Not human, not mechanical, but something else. And then, light. Blinding, searing light. The mirror exploded. Simone fell backward, gasping, and suddenly, she was outside. Simone exhaled. The hotel was gone. Not abandoned. Erased. As if it had never even existed. She stood in the middle of the vacant lot, gripping the blank key card in her trembling hand. Room 609 was no more. She had won. She took a deep, steadying breath and slowly turned, walking away. For the first time in hours, maybe days, she felt light, free. She passed by a storefront window, her reflection gliding alongside her. But something was wrong. She stopped, turned her head, and her reflection did not. A chill raced down her spine. Her own face. No, not her face. The woman in the glass was smiling. Amara Hayes. Simone's lungs seized. She lifted a trembling hand. Her reflection did not move. Her breath hitched as Amara's voice whispered through the glass. "You freed me." Simone's mind reeled. She turned, looking down at herself, her hands, her clothes. The key card still clutched in her fist, but it wasn't her fists. It was Amara's. Simone's pulse roared in her ears. She reached up, touching her face, but it wasn't her face. Her lips parted in a silent scream. Amara's whisper curled around her like smoke. Every 10 years, someone has to take its place. The reflection vanished, and somewhere deep in the nothingness where room 609 once existed, Simone Carter screamed, trapped, lost, gone.